My daughter-in-law called me family embarrassment at her wedding. Until her father recognized me. The champagne glass slipped from my trembling hand, crystal shattering against the marble floor as her words echoed through the grand hall like a slap to my face. "This is the family embarrassment we're stuck with," Claire said in that honeyed tone that was sharp enough to cut. She stood there with her polished smile, her manicured hand brushing lightly against my shoulder as if touching me was already a burden. For a moment, the air in the reception turned heavy, 200 guests turning their heads toward me. The 55-year-old woman in the simple navy dress who suddenly became the center of attention. I saw Charles Whitmore, her father, freeze mid-sip, his glass suspended, his face draining of color until it was paler than his starched shirt. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more. And share your own feelings or story in the comments below. I wish I could say it didn't hurt. That I had grown thick skin through the years, that I had learned to let words roll off me. But standing there, humiliated in front of strangers, family and friends, my heart clenched in a way that felt like betrayal itself. Why would she say that? I whispered in my mind. But before I could even think of a way to react, Charles's eyes locked onto mine. Recognition flickered in his stare, the kind of recognition that twists your stomach, because suddenly you're not invisible anymore. "Evelyn Parker," he whispered under his breath, the name rolling off his tongue like he had just seen a ghost. My knees wobbled beneath me. He wasn't supposed to remember me. Not here. Not tonight. Let me take you back a little, because the way we arrived at this moment wasn't an accident. My name is Evelyn, though people close to me have always called me Eve. For the last 15 years, I'd perfected the art of blending into the background. I had built a life that was quiet, ordinary to the eye, and protected. A life where I didn't stand out, where I could be left alone with my memories, my modest apartment, and the story everyone thought they already knew about me. A widow who lived comfortably on her husband's pension and insurance, nothing more. What no one realized was that invisibility was a mask I wore carefully, one that shielded not only me but also my son from truths that were far too complicated. My son, Daniel, had been dating Claire for 8 months before this day. In that time, I had met her exactly twice. 2 polite dinners where her questions about me weren't out of kindness but calculation. "So, Eve, do you live alone? Do you ever need help managing expenses as you get older?" she asked, her eyes glinting with something that wasn't concern. She wasn't curious about me. She was measuring me, the way one might size up an antique to see if it held value or was just sentimental junk. I brushed it off, told myself Daniel was happy and that was all that mattered. And to be fair, the wedding itself was beautiful, breathtaking even. The Whitmore estate stretched across 50 acres of Connecticut countryside, with its rolling gardens manicured so perfectly they looked unreal. There was a private chapel big enough to seat 300 guests, and Claire walked down the aisle in a gown that glistened like a chandelier, delicate lace flowing behind her. Daniel, my boy, my only son, had a smile brighter than I'd seen since the day we buried his father. For that moment, I allowed myself to forget the nerves that always trailed me, and I silently prayed that this woman, no matter how sharp her edges seemed, would love him the way he deserved to be loved. I had chosen my outfit with care that morning. A navy dress from a department store, nothing fancy, nothing loud. Around my neck, I wore my grandmother's pearls, the one thing I kept for occasions when I wanted to feel like her strength was wrapped around me. I wasn't there to shine. I was there to blend in, to smile, to watch my son start his new chapter. But even then, I noticed Claire's mother, Victoria, giving me looks. The kind of look that stripped a person down, like I was an intruder who had slipped into a place I didn't belong. The reception was no less extravagant. Ice sculptures glittered, a 12-piece orchestra played soft melodies, and there were so many flowers I half expected someone to open a shop right there. I found myself tucked at a corner table, half hidden, watching Daniel twirl his new wife under the lights. For a moment, I felt peace. That was when Claire approached, her parents following close behind her like shadows. "Mom and Dad," she said, her voice coated in sugar, though every word felt like it had venom underneath, "I want you to meet Daniel's mother." Her smile widened. Then she turned back toward me, her words slicing through the air with precision. "This is the family embarrassment we're stuck with." The orchestra kept playing, but in my ears, everything stopped. Gasps rose from nearby tables. Whispers rippled across the room. I felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on me, their curiosity mixed with pity. My face burned. My chest ached. Daniel was still across the room, unaware of what had just happened. And then came the voice that would unravel everything. Charles Whitmore, the patriarch of this grand family, had gone pale. He leaned forward, staring at me as though a memory had just struck him hard. "Wait," he muttered, his voice low but cutting through the room. "Aren't you Evelyn Parker? The woman from the Whitmore Holdings acquisition years ago?" It was as if the marble floor beneath me cracked open. My secret, the one I had buried for more than a decade, was standing in front of everyone, exposed in a single breath. Claire's smirk faltered, her green eyes darting between her father and me in confusion. Victoria's jeweled hand shot to her throat, her bracelet catching the light. And just like that, I wasn't invisible anymore. I could feel my throat tighten, the kind of tightness that makes it impossible to swallow. Charles's words lingered in the air, hovering like smoke after a fire. For a second, I prayed maybe no one else had heard him clearly, that maybe the music had swallowed his whisper. But I knew better. His eyes were too sharp, his expression too certain. My secret was no longer mine. Claire's face shifted in an instant, her smug grin melting into something brittle, almost frightened. "Dad, what are you talking about?" she asked, her voice breaking for the first time all evening. Charles didn't answer her right away. His gaze stayed locked on me, unblinking, as if he were trying to match the woman standing in front of him in a modest dress with the one he remembered from that boardroom years ago. The silence around us grew heavy. I wanted to vanish, to shrink into the floor, to be invisible again. But that option had been ripped away the moment he spoke my name. "I know her," Charles said finally, louder this time. His words sliced through the chatter of guests like glass breaking. "She's the woman who bought my company." Gasps rippled through the crowd, like waves spreading across still water. Claire's smile disappeared completely, replaced with a confused scowl. Victoria looked like she might faint, her diamond earrings swinging as she leaned closer to her husband. And me? My knees felt weak, but I forced myself to stand straighter. I had spent 15 years preparing for moments like this. Only I had always imagined I'd be in a conference room, not at my son's wedding reception. Claire turned to me, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Bought your company?" "Him." She pointed toward her father, then looked back at me as if I had just revealed I'd been living a double life. "What is he even talking about?" "You're Daniel's mother." You can't be." I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. "There must be some mistake," I whispered, though even as I said it, I knew Charles wasn't buying it. He had seen me. He remembered. His hand shook as he set his glass down on the nearest table. "No mistake," he muttered. "It was her. I remember that meeting like it was yesterday. She sat there so quietly, let her lawyers talk, let everyone underestimate her. And then she signed the papers. My whole company, gone just like that. She was the one." The words hit like thunder. Guests shifted uncomfortably, their murmurs filling the air as they exchanged knowing glances. To them, it must have sounded impossible. The widow in the plain navy dress standing in the corner wasn't just Daniel's mother, but the mysterious investor who had walked into a deal worth hundreds of millions. I glanced around, desperate to find my son, to see his face before anyone else's. But Daniel was still across the room, laughing with an old college friend, blissfully unaware of the storm that was forming around his mother. My heart twisted. He didn't know. He had never known. The truth was, I had kept it from him for his sake. From the day my husband Michael and I had stumbled into wealth we never expected, I made a choice. I would protect Daniel from it. Protect him from growing up spoiled, from losing his sense of grit, from ever wondering if his accomplishments were his own or just handed to him. He had lived his life believing his father left me a comfortable pension, enough to survive but never enough to flaunt. He had worked hard, climbed the ladder at his firm with long nights and dedication, built his life step by step because he thought he had to. Because he believed I didn't have anything to give him but love. And now, in one careless moment, Claire had mocked me, and Charles had recognized me, and the truth I had buried so carefully was threatening to spill out in front of everyone. Victoria's hand shot to her throat again. Her voice trembled. "You mean to tell me, this woman," she said, her nose wrinkling like she smelled something foul, "this widow owns Whitmore Holdings? That can't be true. That can't be possible." Charles didn't flinch. He stared at me with those pale eyes, almost accusing. "It is. She's the reason we lost control. The reason I had to sign everything away." His voice cracked, Not with anger but with shame. And she's been here this whole time, hiding behind that dress, pretending she's just... His sentence trailed off, but everyone knew what he meant. Pretending she was nobody. The crowd leaned in closer, their whispers sharp as daggers. I could hear them, no matter how hard I tried to block them out. She bought his company? But she looked so plain. How is that possible? Claire's face turned red. She spun toward me, her hands trembling now. Is this true? Is it? Who are you really? My chest tightened, my mind racing for the right words. But before I could speak, I caught sight of Daniel finally noticing the commotion. His smile faltered as he started walking toward us, confusion etched on his face. My heart pounded in my ears. I couldn't let him find out this way. Not here. Not like this. I lowered my voice, trying to steady it, speaking only to Charles but loud enough for those closest to hear. I think you've mistaken me for someone else, I said, forcing a small, polite smile. But it was useless. He didn't believe me. And his daughter, my new daughter-in-law, was staring at me like I had just turned her entire world upside down. My fingers curled into fists at my side. For years, I had hidden behind modest clothes, an ordinary apartment, and a quiet life. And for years it had worked. No one had looked too closely. No one had asked too many questions. But with just one sentence from Charles Whitmore, everything I had built, the silence, the secrecy, the careful invisibility, was unraveling right in front of me. And as Daniel finally reached us, his eyes darting between his wife, his in-laws and me, I realized with a sinking heart that this night wasn't just going to change him. It was going to change all of us. Daniel's voice cut through the thick silence like a knife. What's going on here? He asked, his steps quickening as he reached us. His eyes went straight to me. His brow furrowed in worry. Mom, why is everyone staring at you like that? I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My lips moved, but my throat felt dry, locked shut. The weight of 100 eyes pressed down on me. I could feel their judgment, their curiosity, their hunger for gossip. Claire stepped in before I could gather myself. Your mother, she said sharply, her words dripping with both anger and disbelief, isn't who you think she is. Daniel froze, his gaze snapping to his wife. What are you talking about? She's not just some modest widow living off scraps, Claire spat, her voice growing louder so the nearby guests could hear. She's the one who bought my father's company. The one who made him sign it all away. Daniel blinked, confusion clouding his face. What? That's ridiculous. Mom? He turned back to me, searching for answers, but I stayed frozen, my heart thudding painfully in my chest. Charles spoke next, his tone firm, almost resigned. It's true, he said, his voice carrying across the room. I remember her face. She was there in the boardroom 3 years ago. She's the one who signed those papers. Whispers erupted again, bouncing around the room like echoes in a cave. Daniel's jaw clenched as he looked at me, his voice soft but cutting. Mom, is this true? I wanted to deny it. God, I wanted to look him in the eyes and shake my head and say no, that they were wrong. But the way Charles stared at me, the way Claire's voice trembled with fury, it was useless. The truth was already spilling out like water from a broken dam. My voice cracked. I forced myself to breathe. This isn't the time or place. Daniel's eyes narrowed. What does that even mean? Claire folded her arms, her expression smug again now that the attention had shifted from her insult to my secret. It means your mother's been hiding things from you, Daniel. Big things. She let us all believe she was just average. But she's been sitting on money, power, influence, all while pretending she had nothing. The words stung. Not because they weren't true, but because of the way she twisted them, like everything I had done was a betrayal instead of protection. Daniel turned to me again, his face pale. Mom, did you really buy her father's company? I took a shaky breath. My son deserved an answer. But not here. Not in front of all these strangers. Daniel, I said softly, please. Not now. Let's talk about this later. But Claire wouldn't stop. She wanted everyone to hear. Of course she doesn't want to talk about it now, she said with a sharp laugh. Because then you'd all see what kind of woman she really is. Hiding in plain sight, playing poor, while secretly controlling everything behind the scenes. Her voice carried across the reception hall, and I felt my stomach twist. She wanted to humiliate me, to paint me as some schemer. And worst of all, she wanted to turn Daniel against me. I finally found my strength. My voice was low, but it cut through her noise. "That's enough, Claire." Her green eyes narrowed at me, but I didn't flinch. Not this time. I straightened my back, the pearls at my neck cold against my skin. "Whatever you think you know, you don't understand the whole story." Daniel's eyes darted between us, his face filled with questions he wasn't ready to ask. I reached out, touched his arm gently. "Please, son. Let's go home. We'll talk tomorrow. Privately." But Claire wasn't finished. She stepped closer, her perfume strong, her smile sharp. "Or maybe," she said loudly, "we should talk right now. In front of everyone. Don't they deserve to know who you really are?" My breath caught. The cruelty in her voice wasn't just about me. It was about power. She wanted to control the narrative. To make me small, to make me ashamed. But she didn't know me, not really. She didn't know what I had endured, what I had built, what I had protected. I met her stare, my voice calm. "Careful. Claire. You might not like the answers you get." For the first time she faltered. A flicker of doubt crossed her face, but it vanished just as quickly as it appeared. She turned to Daniel instead, her tone suddenly sweet again. "Darling, don't you think we deserve honesty? Don't you think your mother should explain herself?" Daniel rubbed his temples, his voice tight. "Enough. Claire. This is my mother. Whatever this is, we'll deal with it privately." But even as he spoke, I could see the doubt forming in his eyes. He wanted to believe me. He wanted to push all this away, pretend it was just a misunderstanding. But he couldn't. The seed had already been planted. I lowered my gaze, my heart aching. 15 years of silence, of careful planning, of protecting him from the truth. Gone in a single evening. And I knew this was only the beginning. Because secrets, once cracked open, have a way of demanding to be told. The night after the wedding, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still hear Claire's words echoing in my ears. Family embarrassment. And then Charles's voice, louder, heavier. "She's the woman who bought my company." I sat on the edge of my bed long after midnight, the lamp casting a soft glow over the room. My hands kept trembling as I held a cup of tea that had already gone cold. The silence in my apartment was thick, but my mind wouldn't quiet down. 15 years of careful hiding had cracked wide open in a single moment. And now, no matter what I did, I couldn't put the pieces back the same way again. At 7 in the morning, my phone rang. Daniel. His voice was sharp, restless, filled with the kind of tension I hadn't heard since he was a teenager arguing over curfew. "Mom," he said without even greeting me, "I need you to explain what happened last night." I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, closing my eyes. "Daniel. It was complicated. I didn't want you to find out this way." "Find out what way?" His voice cracked with frustration. "Dad's patents? The investments? Claire's father said things I don't even understand. He said you were in some acquisition meeting?" "Mom, none of this makes sense. You've always told me we were normal. Comfortable, but normal." I stayed quiet for a moment, and in that silence I could hear him pacing. I imagined him running his hands through his hair the same way he used to when he was a boy and couldn't solve his math homework. "I don't even know what's real anymore," he muttered. "Daniel," I said softly, "please. Let's sit down. Face to face. I'll tell you everything. But not like this. Not on the phone." He sighed, the sound heavy, tired. "Fine. Then I'll come over later. But you'd better be ready to tell me the truth. All of it." When the call ended, I sat there staring at the phone, my stomach knotted. He deserved honesty. He deserved to know the sacrifices, the choices, the reasons. But I feared what the truth might do to him. Would he see me differently? Would he hate me for keeping secrets? My thoughts were interrupted by a vibration on the table. A message flashed across the screen. From Claire. "Evelyn, I think we should meet for lunch today. There are things Daniel and I want to discuss with you." I read it twice, my chest tightening. Lunch? Of course. This wasn't about bonding. This was about money, power, control. I could almost see her smug face as she typed it, her green eyes glinting with calculation. When Daniel arrived at my apartment that afternoon, he looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes, his jaw tense. He paced the living room like he was caged. "Mom," he said, his voice low, "Claire already made a reservation for us. She says she wants to clear the air. But I know her. She wants answers. She wants to dig into whatever it is you've been hiding." I tried to keep my tone calm. "And what about you? Do you want to dig?" He stopped pacing and looked at me with eyes that reminded me so much of his father. Honest, direct, but wounded. "I want the truth," he said simply. "Because if last night was true, then my whole life, everything I thought I knew, it was all a lie." Those words pierced deeper than Claire's insult ever could. A lie. That wasn't what I had built. I had built a shield, not a lie. I had protected him from greed, from entitlement, from people like Claire who would never love him for him. But from where he stood, I understood why it felt like betrayal. He sank onto the couch, running his hands over his face. "Just tell me one thing," he said, his voice breaking. "Did you really buy Claire's father's company?" I sat across from him, my hands folded tightly in my lap. My mouth opened, but before I could answer, his phone rang. Claire's name lit up on the screen. He answered quickly, her voice loud enough that I could hear every word. "Daniel, honey. I'm so excited for lunch today. There are family things I'd love to discuss now that we're officially connected." Her tone was sweet, sugary, but to me it sounded hollow, calculated. She wasn't calling for love. She was calling for leverage. When he hung up, Daniel looked at me with an expression that made my chest ache. "Mom, is there something I need to know before we walk into that lunch?" I looked out the window at the street below, at people walking to work, sipping coffee, worrying about ordinary things like deadlines and errands. Ordinary lives. Simple lives. For a moment, I envied them. I wanted so badly to trade places, to worry about bills instead of billion-dollar secrets. Finally, I met his eyes. My voice shook, but I spoke the truth. "Yes. There's everything you need to know. And today you'll hear it." He nodded slowly, almost bracing himself for a storm he didn't want but couldn't avoid. And as we headed to that lunch, my heart beat heavy in my chest. Because I knew exactly what kind of woman I was about to face across that table. And I knew she wouldn't come with kindness. She would come with claws. Claire was already seated when Daniel and I walked into the restaurant. She had chosen the most expensive place in town, the kind of place where the wine list was thicker than the menu. I noticed immediately how she positioned herself at the corner table, her back straight, her seat facing the entire room like she wanted to be seen. She stood up as we approached, her smile bright, her arms out as though she were greeting family. "Evelyn, Daniel, thank you so much for joining me," she said, her voice sweet, almost too sweet. She leaned in to kiss my cheek, her perfume sharp and overwhelming. But behind her smile, her green eyes flickered with calculation. She wasn't here to bond. She was here to dig. I gave her a polite nod, my face calm though my stomach churned. Daniel pulled out my chair for me, and I sat down slowly, my hands resting on the table to steady myself. "I ordered us a nice bottle of Bordeaux," Claire announced proudly, snapping her fingers at the waiter. "It's a vintage that's very hard to get. I thought it was perfect for celebrating family." "Family," I repeated softly. "That's quite a word to celebrate so soon." Her smile widened, but I could see the sharpness behind it. "Oh, but that's exactly why we're here. Now that we're connected, I think it's important we have transparency." Daniel frowned. "Transparency about what?" Claire didn't answer him. Her eyes stayed locked on me. "Your father and I had a very interesting talk last night. He reminded me of something, about the company, about that acquisition. It's fascinating, really. The way anonymous investors move. Shell companies, quiet transactions. Very discreet." Her words were chosen carefully, each one meant to push me into a corner. I stayed silent, sipping the water in front of me. Let her talk. Let her show her hand first. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Claire, I don't understand what this has to do with lunch." She waved her hand at him, not even looking his way. "Daniel, darling, you don't need to understand everything right now. But your mother does." She leaned closer across the table, lowering her voice. "Evelyn, I studied business at Wharton. Finance was my passion. I know how these things work. And when Daddy mentioned that mysterious investor who bought his company, I thought, well, isn't that interesting? The waiter arrived with the wine, pouring it carefully into crystal glasses. Claire raised hers, clinking it against ours. To family, she said, her eyes never leaving mine. I lifted my glass slowly. To family, I repeated, though my voice was flat. The wine burned as it slid down my throat. I placed the glass down gently and looked at her. So, Claire, what exactly do you want to ask me? Her lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I don't need to ask. I already know. I even found an article from 3 years ago about the acquisition. There was a photo. The woman in the navy dress at the signing table? Her face was half hidden, but the posture, the way she held her purse, her height, it all reminded me of you. Daniel's head snapped toward me, his eyes wide. Mom, he whispered. The silence between us stretched painfully. Claire leaned back in her chair, sipping her wine like she had just won a game. Coincidences are funny, aren't they? She said lightly. Like how my family's financial struggles began just around the time someone paid $800 million for Daddy's company. Or how that same investor disappeared afterward, almost as if she preferred to remain invisible. Her words cut deep, but I didn't flinch. I kept my voice calm. That's quite a theory, Claire. But you've always been imaginative. Daniel's hands trembled as he set his glass down. Mom, is it true? Please just tell me. Are you who she says you are? I looked at my son. My only son, who I had raised to work hard, to fight for everything he wanted, to live with integrity. His eyes begged me for honesty, but his wife sat beside him, watching me like a hawk, waiting to pounce on every word I said. I inhaled deeply, steadying myself. Daniel, I said quietly, there are things about your father, about his work, about what came after, that I never told you. Not because I wanted to lie, but because I wanted to protect you. Claire's smile grew sharper, triumphant. So it is true. I turned my gaze back to her. Don't be so quick to celebrate. You have no idea what you've stumbled into. For the first time, I saw a flicker of unease in her eyes. But she covered it quickly, brushing her hair back and laughing softly. Oh, Evelyn. I know exactly what I've stumbled into. And now. So does Daniel. I could feel my son stare on me, heavy, searching, desperate for answers. And in that moment, I realized what I had feared most had finally come to pass. The wall I had built around him was gone. He knew now that there was a secret, and secrets never stay buried. And as the waiter cleared the table, Claire leaned forward once more, her voice smooth but threatening. So, Evelyn, are you ready to finally tell us everything? The restaurant felt colder than it should have. Even with the warm glow of chandeliers above and the soft music playing in the background, every word hung heavy in the air. The plates of food that had been set before us sat untouched, steam slowly fading, like even the food was holding its breath for what would come next. Daniel's eyes stayed fixed on me. His face was pale, his lips pressed tight, but his hands trembled against the tablecloth. I could see the storm inside him. The boy who once trusted every word I said, now staring at me like he didn't know who I was anymore. Mom, he whispered, his voice strained. Please. No more half-truths. Just tell me everything. I wanted to reach across the table, take his hands like I used to when he was a child, when his world felt too big and too frightening. But I knew if I touched him now, he might pull away. And that thought broke something deep inside me. Claire leaned forward, her eyes sharp, her voice smooth as silk. Yes. Evelyn. Tell him. Tell him how you've been pretending all these years. Tell him how you've been hiding fortunes while he worked himself to the bone, thinking you had nothing. Her words stung, but I kept my voice steady. Claire, you don't get to twist this into something ugly. You don't know the first thing about sacrifice. Oh, but I do, she said quickly, her smile tight. I sacrificed my entire career path when you bought my father's company. Do you know what that did to me? I was supposed to take over one day. It was my birthright. But you ruined that. You stole it. I looked her dead in the eyes. I didn't steal anything. I saved it. Your father was drowning in debt, Claire. That company would have collapsed if someone hadn't stepped in. And if it had collapsed, thousands of employees would have lost their jobs. That's what I was protecting. Not your sense of entitlement. Her face flushed, but she didn't back down. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms, her chin lifting as if she'd won anyway. Daniel exhaled sharply, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Mom, start from the beginning. I need to hear it from you. No more secrets. I closed my eyes for a brief moment. Memories flooded back. Michael, my late husband, bent over his workbench, soldering circuits late into the night. His excitement when his invention finally worked, the day we realized we had something the whole world would want. When your father was alive, I began softly, he invented something. A technology that changed everything for smartphones. We didn't know how valuable it would be at first. We thought maybe it would just make us comfortable enough to retire early. But then companies came calling. Big ones. We sold the patent for more money than we had ever dreamed of. Daniel blinked. How much? I swallowed. This was the part one had dreaded. 22 million. He stared at me like he couldn't process the number. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Claire, of course, gasped dramatically, pressing her hand to her chest. 22 million? She repeated, her eyes glittering. And you hid that? Because it was just the beginning, I continued, ignoring her. Your father had a gift. He could see opportunities before others did. We invested. Carefully at first, then bolder. Real estate, startups, technology, energy. And by the time your father passed, Daniel, we had built something worth more than 800 million. The words fell like stones into a pond, rippling across the table. Daniel's chair creaked as he leaned back, his hands covering his face. 800 million? He whispered. All this time. You let me believe you had just Dad's pension and insurance. That's what you told me. My throat tightened. I know. And I'm sorry. But I wanted you to grow up with drive, with ambition, with a belief that you had to earn everything yourself. I didn't want you spoiled or entitled. I didn't want you to ever wonder if your accomplishments were really yours. He dropped his hands and looked at me with eyes filled with hurt. But you lied to me. For 15 years you lied. The word lied cut deeper than anything else. I had always told myself I was protecting him. But from his side I understood. It was deception. And it hurt him. Claire seized the moment, her voice dripping with satisfaction. See, Daniel? She's been lying to you your whole life. Do you really think you can trust anything she says now? Quiet, Daniel snapped at her. His voice sharper than I'd ever heard him speak to her before. She recoiled slightly, but then narrowed her eyes at me like I was the enemy. Daniel, I said softly, my voice trembling, everything I did was for you. To give you a chance at a normal life. To let you build your own path. You've worked hard. You've earned everything you have. And none of it came from my money. That was the point. His jaw tightened, his hands clenched on the table. And what about Mitchell Holdings? Was it you? Did you really buy her father's company? I hesitated, but then I nodded. Yes, I did. He pushed his chair back, the sound screeching against the polished floor. His face was pale, his eyes burning. Why didn't you ever tell me? Do you have any idea how insane this sounds? My wife's father lost his company to you, and you never thought maybe I should know? Tears stung my eyes. I didn't want to drag you into it. You had your own life, your own career. I didn't want my world to interfere with yours. And I never expected Claire to be your wife. Claire let out a laugh that was anything but kind. Well, isn't that convenient? You ruined my father, and now you want to pretend you didn't mean for this to affect me? Please. Evelyn. You think hiding in your little apartment and dressing like you're middle class makes you noble? It makes you manipulative. Her words sliced through me, but I stayed silent. Because for the first time, Daniel wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me, his eyes searching mine, not hers. He finally spoke, his voice low, pained. Mom, I don't even know who you are anymore. The words broke me. They shattered me more than Claire's insult, more than Charles's recognition. My son, the person I loved most, looked at me like I was a stranger. I wanted to tell him everything, every detail, every sacrifice, every night I stayed up worrying if I'd done the right thing. But the truth was, no matter what I said now, I couldn't undo the years of silence. I couldn't undo the fact that I had built a wall of secrecy between us. And as I sat there, trying to steady myself, I realized something chilling. This wasn't just about Daniel anymore. Claire wasn't going to let this go. She wasn't interested in understanding me. She was interested in what she thought she could take. And if I wasn't careful, she was about to turn my son into her weapon. The ride home from the restaurant was silent. Daniel drove, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. I sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the city lights blurring past, my chest heavy, my throat aching with unshed tears. Every so often I glanced at him, hoping for a word, a glance, anything. But his jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the road. When we finally pulled up outside my apartment, he didn't turn off the engine right away. He just sat there, staring straight ahead, breathing heavily like he was trying to calm a storm inside him. "Daniel," I whispered, reaching out. "Please. Say something." He shook his head, his voice rough. "I don't even know what to say, Mom. I don't know what's real anymore. My whole life, you made me believe we were just average. That we had to fight for everything. I worked 70-hour weeks, I sacrificed. I thought you were living on scraps. And the whole time, you were worth hundreds of millions." "Daniel, No!" He cut me off, his voice cracking. "You should have told me. Maybe not when I was a kid, but at least when I grew up. When Dad died. You should have trusted me." The word trusted lodged itself in my heart like a blade. I swallowed hard. I wanted to, Daniel. God knows I wanted to. But I was scared. I thought if you knew it would change everything. I didn't want money to define you. I wanted you to build your own life. He finally turned to look at me, his eyes red. "Do you have any idea how that feels? To find out your whole childhood, your whole adulthood, was built on a lie." Tears slid down my cheeks. "It wasn't a lie. I was protecting you. From greed, from people who would use you, from exactly this situation." Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. He looked down, and I didn't need to ask who it was. "Claire." He answered reluctantly. "Daniel," her voice came through the speaker, sweet but sharp. "Are you okay? Did you get the answers you wanted?" He closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Not really. Everything's just too much." "Well," she said, her tone light but calculated, "we'll figure it out together. You and me. We're a team now. And we need to make sure your mother's situation is handled properly." I froze. Handled properly. The way she said it made my stomach knot. "What do you mean?" Daniel asked, his voice tense. "Oh, nothing bad," Claire replied quickly. "I just think we need to be smart. If she has assets, if she's been hiding them, it affects all of us. Our future. Our family planning. Don't you think we should have transparency? Don't you think we should protect ourselves?" "Claire," Daniel began, but she cut him off. "I'm serious, Daniel. This isn't just about her anymore. It's about us. About our marriage. Don't you think we deserve to know exactly what she's been hiding? Where the money is. How much there is. And how it affects our future." I felt my hands shaking. She wasn't even pretending anymore. She wasn't talking about family. She was talking about money. About control. Daniel sighed heavily. "I don't know. I need time to think." "Well, don't take too long," she said lightly, but there was steel under her words. "Because I've already started looking into some things. And if she won't tell us, we'll find out another way." The line went dead. Daniel set the phone down, his hands trembling. He didn't look at me. He just muttered, "I need to go," and climbed out of the car. I sat there in the quiet, my heart hammering. Claire had already started digging. She wasn't just curious. She was investigating. The next morning, I called James Harrison, my financial advisor. His voice was calm as always, but there was an edge of concern when I explained what had happened. "Evelyn," he said, "you need to understand something. If your daughter-in-law is asking questions, and if she's hired anyone, it's not casual. She's trying to build a case. I've seen this before. It starts with curiosity, then it becomes entitlement, then it turns into legal action." I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, my stomach sinking. What kind of legal action? Family wealth disputes. Trust challenges. Asset tracing. If she digs deep enough, she'll find your shell companies, your investments. They're protected, but nothing is bulletproof if someone is determined enough. Especially someone with business training and legal connections. My breath caught. She's dangerous. Yes, he said bluntly. And she won't stop. If you want my advice, you need to get ahead of this. Don't wait for her to corner you. Control the narrative before she does. After the call, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the steam rising from my coffee. My mind replayed everything. Claire's smirk at the wedding, her sharp tone at lunch, her fake sweetness on the phone. She wasn't here to build a family. She was here to build leverage. And then it hit me. She hadn't married my son for love. She had married him as an investment. The thought made me sick. My hands curled into fists. For 15 years, I had let people underestimate me, dismiss me, think I was invisible. And it worked. But Claire's little performance at that wedding had changed something inside me. I was done being underestimated. That night, I pulled out boxes of old files and records, spreading them across the table. Years of investment papers, company acquisitions, real estate holdings. Page after page told a story of patience, strategy, and sacrifice. This wasn't luck. It wasn't chance. It was hard work. My husband's genius, my discipline, our vision. And if Claire wanted to play games with me, she was about to learn something she didn't expect. Because Evelyn Parker, the quiet widow, was gone. And in her place stood the woman who had built an empire without anyone noticing. The next evening, Daniel called me. His voice was tight, like every word carried weight. Mom, he said, Claire and I want to come over tomorrow. She has some ideas about how we should move forward. Ideas. The way he said the word told me everything. It wasn't his idea. It was hers. And I already knew what kind of ideas Claire would bring. All right, I said quietly. Come by tomorrow. When the call ended, I stood in the middle of my apartment, the weight of 15 years pressing down on me. I could either let her corner me or I could set the stage myself. And I was done being cornered. The next day, I prepared carefully. I laid out a simple cheese plate, opened a modest bottle of wine, nothing expensive, nothing that would hint at the truth of my wealth. But I also had a folder waiting on the bookshelf, documents my advisor James had helped me gather, proof of Claire's own investigation, her credit accounts, even a record of the private investigator she had hired. When Daniel and Claire arrived, they both walked in like diplomats about to negotiate peace. Daniel's face was tired, his smile forced. Claire, however, looked fresh and calculated, dressed in a conservative suit, holding a sleek portfolio in her hand. Evelyn, she began, her voice warm, practiced. Thank you for having us. I think it's important that everything we discuss tonight stays within the family. We're all on the same side here. I almost smiled at her presumption. Of course, dear, I said softly. What did you want to discuss? She opened her portfolio, revealing neatly prepared documents. I realize our conversation at lunch may have been tense, but I've been thinking a lot about how we can make this situation work for everyone. Daniel shifted in his seat, clearly uneasy. Claire. But she pressed on, ignoring him. I believe family wealth works best when it's managed collectively. When it's structured in a way that benefits not just one person, but all generations. What I'd like to propose is a collaborative approach, a family foundation. A foundation, I repeated, keeping my voice calm. Yes, she said eagerly, sliding one of the papers across the table. It would allow us to give back charitably, earn tax advantages, and coordinate investments. It would protect your privacy while also bringing transparency to family planning. I raised an eyebrow. And who would control this foundation? Claire smiled as if she had been waiting for that question. A board of family trustees. You, me, Daniel. And eventually, of course, our children. Her eyes gleamed at that last part. She was already thinking of heirs, of legacy, of tying herself permanently into the fortune she thought was hers to claim. Daniel rubbed his forehead. Claire, maybe we should slow down. But she was unstoppable now. To start, we'd need initial funding. Something substantial. Maybe 50 or 60 million. Enough to establish credibility in the philanthropic community. I set down my glass slowly. 50 or 60 million. As a starting point. My son's new wife, who just days ago called me a family embarrassment, was now sitting in my apartment suggesting I hand her control of tens of millions. I leaned back, folding my hands in my lap. That's very ambitious. It's practical, she replied, her tone sharp now. It ensures stability. It ensures no one has to hide anything anymore. I tilted my head, my eyes narrowing just slightly. Tell me, Claire, do you love my son? The question hit her like a slap. She blinked, her mouth opening and closing before she let out a laugh. Of course I do. What kind of question is that? A simple one, I said calmly. Do you love him for who he is? Or for what you think being married to him might provide? The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel stared at her, his face pale. Claire shifted uncomfortably, her polished facade cracking for the first time. That's unfair, she said quickly. That's not how relationships work. I stood slowly, walked to the bookshelf, and returned with the folder. I set it down on the table and opened it, revealing documents that made Claire's face drain of color. This, I said softly, is a record of your communications with Ashford Investigations, a private firm you hired to research shell companies and anonymous investors. Quite expensive. These, I pulled out another page, are records of your recent consultations with Harrison Webb and Associates, a law firm specializing in family wealth disputes. And here, I laid out the last papers, are your new credit accounts, opened in the last month, financing this little project of yours. Daniel turned to her, his voice sharp, wounded. Claire, you hired investigators? You've been digging into my mother behind my back. She scrambled, her hands shaking as she reached for the papers. Daniel, it's not what it looks like. I was just trying to protect our family. I needed to understand the situation. You were building a case, I corrected firmly. And you weren't doing it for my son. You were doing it for yourself. For your family. Daniel's face hardened as he looked at her. Claire, tell me that isn't true. Her lips trembled, but no words came. I spread the rest of the documents across the table. Your parents' estate is mortgaged at 80% of its value. Their investments drained to keep up appearances. Their income? Mostly from consulting fees arranged by me through Whitmore Holdings' new management. Your family has been living on borrowed time, and you thought marrying my son would solve that. You didn't marry him out of love. You married him as an investment strategy. Claire's face went pale, then red. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. That's not true, she shouted, her voice cracking. You're twisting everything. I was trying to plan for our future. Daniel's and mine. You're the one hiding things. You're the one manipulating everything. Daniel stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. His voice was quiet, broken. Claire, did you marry me because you loved me, or because you thought I came from money? She froze. For nearly a full minute, the only sound in the room was the hum of the refrigerator. And in that silence, her lack of answer was louder than anything she could have said. I looked at my son, his face pale with shock and heartbreak, and I spoke gently. Daniel, sometimes silence tells us everything we need to know. For 2 weeks after that night, the air between us all grew heavier, like a storm that refused to break. Daniel moved back into his apartment, saying he needed space to think. His voice on the phone was clipped, cautious, like every word might tip him into choosing a side he wasn't ready to choose yet. Claire didn't come back to my apartment after that confrontation. She stormed out that night, her cheeks red, her hands trembling, her voice shaky as she spat out, "You'll regret this, Evelyn." And she kept her word. The first call came from James Harrison, my financial advisor. His tone, usually calm and steady, carried urgency. "Evelyn, we have a problem," he said. My chest tightened. What kind of problem? He cleared his throat. Someone has been making inquiries with the SEC. Professional inquiries. About your investment structures, your shell companies, even about possible insider trading. I froze, gripping the phone tighter. You mean, a regulator? Not yet, James said carefully. But these are the kinds of questions lawyers ask before filing formal complaints. Whoever it is, they're trying to build a case. The blood drained from my face. I didn't need to ask who. I already knew. Claire. How serious is it? I whispered. He sighed. Your structures are legal. We've been careful. But they're complex, Evelyn. And complexity always looks suspicious to outsiders who don't understand the context. If this escalates, you could be looking at a lengthy investigation. Even if you're cleared, the process alone could ruin your privacy. It could ruin your son's reputation too. People might assume he benefited from undisclosed wealth. My stomach twisted. Daniel's career was built on his own work, his own sweat. If the world thought it was all because of me, because of money he didn't even know about, it could undo everything he'd built. The very thing I'd spent years protecting him from could destroy him now. When I hung up, I sat at the dining table, staring at the stack of financial records spread across it. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of fear. Not about the money, but about losing the one thing I valued more than all of it, my son's trust. The fear became real when Daniel showed up the next evening. He looked tired, his shoulders slumped, his eyes ringed with shadows. Mom, he said quietly, we need to talk. I gestured for him to sit, but he stayed standing, pacing the room like he couldn't stay still. Claire filed for a separation, he blurted out. My heart dropped. Separation. He nodded, running a hand through his hair. Her lawyer says she's worried about financial liabilities. That if there are hidden assets, she doesn't want to be tied to them. I stared at him in disbelief. She's protecting herself, I said bitterly. She's positioning for divorce. Daniel's voice cracked. It feels like she's protecting herself from me. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him he was right, but he lifted his gaze and looked at me with eyes filled with pain. Do you realize what this looks like? It looks like you orchestrated this whole thing. Like you wanted my marriage to fall apart just so you could prove you were right about her. The words stabbed deeper than I expected. I reached for him. Daniel. No. I never wanted your marriage to fail. I just wanted you to see who she really was before it was too late. But you investigated her, he snapped, his voice rising. You had files, reports. Like she was some criminal. And now she's turning around and saying you're the manipulator. That you've been pulling strings this whole time. I swallowed hard, my eyes stinging. Daniel, I didn't manipulate her. I defended myself. She was already investigating me before I lifted a finger. He shook his head, his face filled with confusion. I don't even know who you are anymore, Mom. You've been hiding behind this mask my whole life. First you hide the money. Then you hide your identity as the person who bought her father's company. Now you're fighting my wife with lawyers and investigations. What's next? The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally I spoke, my voice breaking. Daniel. I am the same woman who raised you. The same mother who taught you to be honest, to work hard, to treat people with respect. Everything I did, every secret I kept, was to protect you. To make sure your life was yours. He looked at me, his jaw clenched, his eyes wet. And now I don't know if I even believe that anymore. The words crushed me. But before I could speak, he added quietly, Claire's lawyer is pushing for a family meeting. Her parents, her attorney, you, me. They want to discuss a settlement. I froze. A settlement? Yes. His voice was flat, bitter. Because apparently, you're not just my mother anymore. You're some corporate mogul sitting on assets they think they deserve a share of. I closed my eyes. Of course. That was her plan. She couldn't control me, so she would drag me into a legal battle, hoping I'd cave under the pressure. I opened my eyes and looked at my son, my voice calm now. Daniel, this isn't just about money anymore. It's about control. And you need to decide if you're standing with me, or against me. His lips parted, but he didn't speak. He just turned away, staring out the window, his silence cutting deeper than words ever could. And in that moment, I knew the truth. Claire wasn't done. She was only getting started. And if I didn't end this quickly, she was going to burn everything I had built. My fortune, my privacy, my son's trust, until there was nothing left but ashes. The meeting was set for Monday afternoon in James Harrison's conference room. I walked in with my head held high, my documents neatly arranged in my bag. Daniel sat stiffly beside me, his face pale and unreadable. Across the table sat Claire, her parents, and their attorney Marcus Webb, a man with slick hair, an expensive suit, and eyes that scanned the room like a predator. The air was so tense you could almost hear it hum. Marcus leaned forward, opening a thick folder. "Let's be clear about why we're here," he said smoothly. "My client has reason to believe Mrs. Evelyn Parker has concealed substantial assets while allowing her son's wife's family to experience financial hardship. This suggests either a deliberate pattern of deception or financial impropriety that warrants investigation." James, calm as ever, adjusted his glasses. "Mrs. Parker's financial activities are entirely legal and properly documented. These accusations appear to be fueled by personal grievances, not legitimate concerns." Claire's voice cut in, sharp but controlled. "This isn't about grievances. This is about family. My husband deserves honesty. My family deserves respect. Evelyn has been manipulating everyone, hiding who she really is while pretending to be modest. That's not just unfair. It's cruel. I let her speak. I let her pour out her rehearsed lines, her feigned righteousness. And when she was done, I leaned forward, my voice steady. Claire, let's talk about respect. At your wedding, you introduced me to your parents as a family embarrassment. Days later, you hired investigators to dig into my private affairs. You filed complaints to regulators, hoping to force me into a corner. And now you sit here demanding respect? You don't even know what the word means." The room went silent. Robert Whitmore, her father, shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, I saw shame in his eyes. Maybe he was remembering the moment he lost his company, or maybe he was realizing just how far his daughter was willing to go. I continued, my tone sharper now. "You say you want family unity. What you want is control. You want my son's life, my husband's legacy, my work, my money, all neatly handed to you, tied with a bow. But let me make something very clear. You will never control me, Claire." Her face flushed, but she tried to keep her composure. "So what? You'll just shut us out? Pretend we don't exist? Is that your solution?" I smiled, for the first time in weeks. A genuine smile, one that came not from fear but from certainty. "No. My solution is simple." I turned to Marcus. "Here's my counter-proposal. Claire withdraws every complaint she's filed, ends every investigation she started, and agrees never to contact me or my son again. In return, I'll give her and her parents $5 million. A one-time settlement. And after that, this chapter is closed forever." The room went still. Daniel's head snapped toward me, his eyes wide. "Mom, you can't be serious." "Oh, I am," I said calmly. "Because I'd rather pay for peace than live in constant war." Claire blinked, stunned. Her lips parted, but no words came at first. Finally she laughed, but it was hollow. $5 million? To walk away from my husband? That's insane. I met her gaze evenly. "Is it? Because we both know what you really want. You want money, security, leverage. This gives you all three. And if you refuse, you'll get nothing. Your family loses their house, your father loses his consulting fees, and you spend years fighting legal battles you cannot win. So, ask yourself, Claire, is it really insane? Or is it just the best deal you'll ever get?" She turned to her attorney, whispering urgently. Marcus's face tightened as he calculated. He knew what I knew. $5 million clean was worth more than years of expensive litigation with no guarantee. The silence dragged on. Finally, Claire looked at me, her green eyes hard. "You're ruthless." I leaned forward, my voice steady. "No. I'm protective. Of my son. Of my family. Of the life I built from nothing. Don't mistake protection for ruthlessness." Daniel sat frozen, his face pale, his hands trembling. "Claire," he whispered, "answer me. Did you marry me for me? Or for the money you thought I had?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Claire's lips trembled, but she couldn't form an answer. And in that silence, Daniel finally saw the truth. By the next morning, Marcus called James to accept the settlement. By evening, the papers were signed. $5 million was wired to an account, and just like that, Claire was gone. She left Daniel, left the marriage, left our lives, vanished as if she had never been part of our family. The weeks that followed were quiet, but heavy. Daniel filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. He didn't talk much at first, but slowly, the walls between us began to crack. 6 months later, he called me one Sunday evening. His voice was lighter than it had been in months. "Mom," he said, "I met someone. Her name is Sarah. She's a teacher." I smiled, a warmth blooming in my chest. "And does she know about me?" "About everything." He chuckled softly. I told her my mom lives in a nice apartment and drives a reliable car. You know what she said? She said that sounded like a woman who has her priorities straight. Tears pricked my eyes. "She sounds wonderful." "She is. And when you meet her, can you just be the mom who raised me to work hard and treat people with kindness? Leave the corporate empire at home." I laughed, a sound I hadn't made in a long time. "Of course, sweetheart. But if she turns out to be investigating our family finances, all bets are off." He laughed too, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I heard peace in his voice. That night, as I sat alone with a glass of wine, I thought about everything that had happened. About the secrets, the lies, the pain. And I realized something. Hiding who I was had protected me for years. But it had also built walls between me and the person I loved most. The truth nearly tore us apart, but it also gave us the chance to rebuild, this time without secrets. The lesson was simple, but hard-earned. Money can build walls, but honesty builds bridges. And in the end, no fortune is worth losing the people you love.